Hello, good evening. It is 8 o'clock and this is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the search for more potential victims of one of the country's most prolific sex offenders. Zhen Haozhou was convicted today of drugging and raping 10 women, both here and in China. He filmed the attacks and kept a box of his victims' belongings as trophies. Shockingly, only 2 of the women have been identified, with another 8 yet to be traced. And tonight, police are appealing for even more women to come forward, with fears there could be more than 50 other victims. Also tonight, suggestions the Prime Minister could accompany Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington to rebuild his relationship with Donald Trump. That's according to the French government, saying Emmanuel Macron would also make the trip as he and Sir Keir Starmer try to keep Europe and the United States together. Plus, politically painful, we'll be discussing the Chancellor's plans to cut billions from the welfare budget as she tries to get to grips with the public finances. And street parties and services of Thanksgiving, 4 days of events to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Good evening. Police have begun the search for women who have survived the predations of a serial rapist, a man who it's feared could be one of the UK's most prolific sex offenders. The Chinese PhD student Zhen Haozhou was convicted of the rape of 10 women, both in London and in China. Only 2 of the women have been identified, with 8 yet to be traced. Zhou filmed his attacks. Police are finding hundreds of hours of footage following his arrest, and they believe he may have attacked more than 50 other women, who they say they now need to speak to urgently. Well, our correspondent Amelia Harper has our top story and a warning. It does contain details which many will find distressing.
You Mr. Zhou, by any chance?
At nearly 2 in the morning, police arrive at the flat of this PhD student.
And your surname?
Officers confirm this is Zhen Haozhou, the mechanical engineer turned sexual predator.
Yeah, can you show me your ID, please?
Once inside, we see his unmade bed, the location for his prolific offending.
OK, sir, I'm arresting you on suspicion of rape.
The 28-year-old Chinese national came to the UK in 2017 to study mechanical engineering before beginning a PhD in London a few years later. He presented this image of a successful academic to the outside world, but inside he harboured dark sexual fantasies. After nearly 20 hours of deliberation, a jury found him guilty of drugging and raping 10 women between 2019 and 2023. 3 were attacked in London and 7 in China. All, though, appeared to be of Chinese heritage.
Zhou is a clearly dangerous, predatory and cowardly individual who has deceived his way into the lives of his victim survivors and then incapacitated them before committing the most horrendous sexual assaults.
Zhou lived here in southeast London during his PhD. It was while he was a student that he raped his victims, including one inside this building, while she was drunk and unconscious. And it happened here in this bedroom, captured on a camera he'd set up by the bed.
How many videos do you have?
Police investigated after one victim called them.
No comments.
How many victims are there?
And the real answer to that
No comments.
was shocking. Police seized cameras and his phone containing videos and pornographic images of 9 of the women he attacked. The judge today labelling him a dangerous and predatory offender for doing so. On his phone, police also found images of a drug with the words "suitable for full-body anaesthetisation" on the packaging, as well as the tranquiliser triazolam. Police also found a box of items in his flat, items belonging to the women. Zhou claimed the sex was consensual. He said he liked rape role-play, but some of the jury were in tears as they watched how one of those women begged him to stop. The material so explicit, the jury won't have to do jury service for another 2 decades. Despite the footage, 8 of Zhou's victims remain unidentified. For 7 of them, their horrendous ordeals took place nearly 5,000 miles away, somewhere in China.
We were satisfied that the strength of those videos
alone was enough to pursue a prosecution. In respect to the offences that occurred in China, because we were satisfied that Zhu qualified as a UK resident and that the offence of rape exists in China, we were able to authorise those charges as well.
And as Zhou remained silent while police played him back the footage he'd created, one query remains.
After seeing that, is there anything you want to tell me?
Could there be more?
Ultimately, sadly, there's a far greater body of evidence as well, which we're still working our way through, which indicates that certainly as many as 50 other different women may potentially have been victims. If all these do bear out to be potentially serious sexual assaults or rapes, then ultimately this may make Zhou one of the most prolific offenders in the United Kingdom.
This is the face of a man who's now at the heart of the largest current rape investigation in the UK. Officers have launched an appeal to urge anyone who might be a victim of Zhou to come forward. And in the meantime, they continue to look back at the material they've found. The student becomes the studied.
I'm pleased to say Amelia joins us now for more on this. Good evening to you, Amelia. A horrific story. Just talk to us about the investigation and where it could go next.
Well, I suppose it might help to say where it started. It all started when one victim bravely came forward and called the police and said that she had been raped. And it was from that that the police were then able to look into his devices and they were able to search his flat. And this has formed a huge part of the trial in terms of just the sheer amount of material that they came across, not only in his flat, but also contained within hidden cameras and also on his phone. They found over 700,000 artefacts and watched over 1,000 videos, much of that depicting him raping and sexually assaulting his victims. He said he had a habit of taking pictures of the people that he raped. He claimed, obviously, during the trial that the sex was consensual. He said that he liked, during the trial, was referred to as time-stop pornography, which is where he said he enjoyed watching pornography of sleeping women. But when they assessed his devices, they found no evidence of this. It then went wider than this into the drugs that they found. Namely, the jury found him guilty of using the date rape drug butanediol. Once it's ingested, it turns into GBH inside the body. He used that to render his victims barely conscious during his attacks. And from this, police were then able to look into more footage that didn't form part of this trial that suggested that he has a further 50 victims, so 60 in total. They suggest, the police, that 25 of those victims have been sexually assaulted. They may not know that, crucially, in the UK, and 25 in China. They say already during the course of the trial, we can now reveal that one woman has come forward and they've been in conversation with her. But they've said that the testimony from the victims that bravely came forward during the trial has been crucial to providing context to the footage that they found. But fundamentally, they have said that if this material bears out to be evidence of sexual assaults and rapes, this is what the Metropolitan Police believe they are seeing, then this would make Zhou one of the most prolific sexual offenders in the United Kingdom.
Amelia, thank you for that. Now, let's speak to the former Detective Inspector from the Met, Hamish Brown, for more on this. Hamish, good evening to you. Thank you so much for being with us. You've heard Amelia's reporting there. Just a unique case. Talk to us about how detectives and the difficulties they will have had in carrying out this investigation.
Yes, good evening, Camille. Yeah, a unique and absolutely disgusting and horrific case, may I say. And there's been a conviction, good and well done for the brave ladies who came forward. And the way further for the Metropolitan Police now, and let me say straight away, police forces, not only in the Met, but around the country, often are criticised for the way they dealt with rape allegations. Well, that's not the case here, and well done to the Crown Prosecution Service for taking matters forward. But the police job has really just started because they've got a huge amount to do. And I think it's a matter, if they can, tactfully identifying those ladies who haven't been who didn't come forward, and we don't know or they don't know who they are. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is, can you ever get closure from this? I don't know. But to have them identified and let them know that the person has been convicted, and that just might help them. The second thing is that people haven't told anyone about it, not received any treatment or support. That is absolutely awful, and these people desperately need that support. So there are good reasons to come forward, albeit this man, I'm not even going to give him a name because he doesn't deserve one. This person will go to prison for a long time. And let me say, the judge, of course, a very senior judge, will make up her own mind, but we'll look at the probation reports, the pre-sentence reports. We'll hear what defence counsel has to say in mitigation. But just bear in mind that rape carries a life imprisonment, not a mandatory life, but the judge has indicated he will go to prison for a very long time. Good.
And Hamish, talk to us about the fact that we believe that many of these victims may well have been in China as well. There is legislation, it's on the statute books, isn't it, that crimes committed, rape and sexual assault committed abroad can be tried here?
Yes, absolutely, and this is where the Crown Prosecution Service have excelled, so good for them. But I think the advertising, the showing of the photograph of this person in China, having the cooperation of government, of police forces. I'm not entirely sure what the relationship is, but there must be something there. And it is for the common good that, for the reasons I've mentioned, these people are identified. Now, I know that he'd taken some things as some sort of treasures from his victims. Now, the difficulty here is, and I once dealt with a case where I had a murder victim. In fact, I think it's the only case where the murder victim was a person identity not known. And it wasn't until years after the trial we actually identified the person. And we did this through jewellery. Now, this can't happen here because publicly it could identify the victims. They just don't want to be identified publicly, very, very understandably. So it is essential for the victims to come forward. And with that, the photograph of this person has to be publicised around the world, really, certainly in China, certainly throughout the UK, and goodness knows what else he's got up to. Absolutely dire, as low as it can possibly get. But may I reiterate, well done for the brave ladies who did come forward, and I and everyone else wishes them well.
Absolutely. And Hamish, look, there is that call from the police for people who may think that they have been a victim of this man to come forward. What support is out there for those people that may well find themselves in that position and may be fearful of coming forward at this stage?
Well, firstly, the police have said, for victims, please to come forward. If you recognise the person, for example, you just might not know what's happened to you because of the drugs involved. But if you have concerns or you realise what has happened to you, the Met have put out an email which is survivors@met.police.uk. Please feel free to contact that. The police will be very pleased to hear from them. And with that, the support is available. There are many support organisations out there. They're specially trained police officers who are designed to deal with victims of this horrific crime. So it's not only the police, there are outside agencies as well. And it is there, but it is important for victims to come forward, if nothing else, to get that closure or semi-closure with the knowledge that this dreadful person may never come out of prison. And with a bit of luck, that would be precisely the case.
OK, Hamish Brown, former Detective Inspector at the Met. Do appreciate your time and expertise this evening, Hamish. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So breaking news to bring you now, and a child has died and another has been seriously injured after being hit by a car on a rugby pitch in Cumbria. It happened at the Kendal Rugby Club just before 5 p.m. this evening. Now, it was suggested... let's bring in our correspondent, Shimon Freeman-Powell, for more on this. Shimon, thanks for being with us. Good evening to you. So what more do we know?
Well, as you say, Kamali, this was a serious collision which has injured one child and killed another. Now, Sky News understands that this vehicle was a black BMW i40 which drove onto the Kendal rugby pitch at around 5 p.m. earlier today. Now, this rugby pitch is just off of Shap Road in Kendal in Cumbria. Now, police have sadly confirmed that one of the children have died. The other child was injured and has been treated by paramedics, with Cumbria Police also confirming that the families of both children have been informed and are being supported by police. Now, Cumbria Police have confirmed that a man in his 40s has been arrested for suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. And in a statement, Cumbria Police have also stressed that they believe this is an isolated incident and are not treating it as terror-related. Of course, though, this will cause concern for people that live locally. We've already heard from Tim Farron, the MP for that area. He said this is devastating, utterly heartbreaking news, praying for the children and their families. We've also had a statement from the rugby club as well, saying the facilities are now temporarily closed whilst it supports the ongoing investigation. The police have also added that the area will remain cordoned off while the investigation continues, urging any members of the public that may have witnessed this collision to come forward with any relevant information.
Shimon, thank you very much for that. Now, it's been suggested that the Prime Minister could travel to Washington with Volodymyr Zelensky to try and help repair the Ukrainian leader's relationship with Donald Trump. That's according to a spokesperson for the French government, who also says that President Emmanuel Macron will be on the trip. Well, Macron addressed his nation in the past hour, saying that he hopes Trump would stand with Europe, but that the continent's future can't be decided in Washington or Moscow.
I want to believe that the US will stand by our side, but we have to be ready for that not to be the case. Whether we reach peace in Ukraine soon or not, we need to be able to recognize the Russian threat and better defend ourselves in order to deter such attacks. Whatever happens, we need to provide ourselves with more arms, more equipment in terms of defense, to provide a dissuasive force. And we're committed on that path. We need to do more than we've done in the past to reinforce our defense and security. The future of Europe cannot be decided on in Moscow or Washington.
Now, a court has been shown CCTV of the movements of the triple murderer Carl Clifford on the day he killed his former partner, her sister and their mother. The 26-year-old has pleaded guilty to murdering Louise, Hannah and Carol Hunt in a Crossbow knife attack at their family home last year, but he's denied a charge of rape. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports now from Cambridge Crown Court.
The prosecutors spent most of their day talking the jurors through what Carl Clifford was doing in the days leading up to the murders. And to illustrate that, the jurors have been shown various CCTV clips. The first shows him on the 4th of July. That's 5 days before the killings. He was in a B&Q store near his North London home buying duct tape, said the prosecutor, the tape that he was to use tying up and restraining his ex-girlfriend Louise Hunt during that killing spree. The next day, said the prosecutor, he spent the day in the gym, and while he was there, he was using his phone to research buying knives. Eventually, on Amazon, he bought a knife that cost him something like £89, 10 inches, that he was later to use to kill Carol Hunt, said the prosecutor. On the morning of the murders themselves, Clifford was pictured on CCTV at a garden centre. He was wandering around with his parents, and at one point he was pushing a buggy containing his niece. 3 hours after that, he was seen pulling up in his car after a journey of about half an hour in Hertfordshire, close to the home of the Hunts, and he had with him already, said the prosecutor, the knife and the crossbow that he was going to use to commit those murders. It was minutes after that he tricked his way into the Hunt's home. He said he had clothes of Louise's to return, and then he murdered first Carol Hunt with the knife that he'd bought on Amazon, and then he used a crossbow to kill Louise and then her sister Hannah when she turned up at the house. The prosecutor said that he raped Louise as well, and that's the crux of this trial. Kyle Clifford says he didn't rape Louise. Any semen that was found on her, he says, was the result of consensual sex that they had 16 days before the murders. The trial is expected to finish in the next couple of days.
Well, still to come on the UK tonight. Emma Raducanu opens up about her stalking ordeal at the Dubai Tennis Championships. And we'll discuss the Chancellor's plans to cut billions from the welfare budget. And organisers announced plans for 4 days of events to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day. We'll take a look.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Very good morning to you all. Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back. Now, the British number 2 tennis player Emma Raducanu says she is ready to return to the court after her ordeal at the Dubai Tennis Championships. The 22-year-old described how she could hardly breathe after receiving repeated unwanted attention from a man displaying fixated behaviour before and during her match. Well, speaking to journalists, she said, "I saw him in the first game of the match. I was distraught. I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to finish. I literally couldn't see the ball through the tears." She added, "The first 4 games ran away from me because I was just not on the court. It was a pretty good effort for me to keep on playing. After the match, I completely broke down in tears. There was just so much emotion. I needed a week off to take a breather. I feel a lot better." Well, the tennis star has been speaking to our colleagues at Sky Sports.
Being here, I feel a lot better. I wasn't necessarily sure if I was going to come and compete so soon after what happened in Dubai, but I'm glad I made the decision to come here, and I'm loving, being here. I'm happy on the court, so, yeah.
And while she's at her tournament in Indian Wells in California, she's going to have a chaperone to keep her safe. Now, the government has announced plans to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day in May, when people across Britain will be encouraged to celebrate with street parties. There will be 4 days of concerts and processions, and landmarks all around the country are going to be lit up to mark the days the Allies formally accepted the surrender of Germany to end the Second World War in 1945. Well, the Director of Remembrance at the Royal British Legion, Philippa Rawlinson, joins us now. Philippa Rawlinson, thanks so much for joining us, and good evening to you. So just talk to us about how important a milestone this is.
Well, it's a really important milestone. This year we're marking 80 years since the end of the Second World War, with VE Day, Victory in Europe Day in May, and then VJ Day in August, which is the end of the Second World War. And the Royal British Legion is really proud to be marking these commemorations, putting veterans and the veterans' stories at the heart of our storytelling and commemorations right through the year. The Royal British Legion, we've got over 100 veterans registered with us already, and the website is open for more veterans and their families to let us know where they are and how they would like to mark these anniversaries, because it's really important that we put them front and centre, because this could be the last time we have the opportunity to have them with us for such a momentous occasion.
The sad thing is that those veterans may well be gone the next time that we have a big occasion to mark of VE Day and VJ Day. How will that, do you think, change the work that you guys do in the British Legion?
Well, we're all about keeping stories alive, and we're encouraging people to find out their connections to the Second World War. It was the most destructive war in history. It affected everybody, so we all have a connection. So we want people to share their stories. We want people to come together. Royal British Legion branches right across the country, and through our work through schools programmes, we'll be encouraging people to create commemorations, find out their stories, come together over a cup of tea perhaps, and share and remember, celebrate, and remember those that paid the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we have today. So, we're all affected. Find out how you're connected, and commemorate with the veterans that we still have with us now.
And Philippa, remembering that sacrifice, remembering that time, I guess at this moment when there is war in Europe again, and we're hearing a talk of the war perhaps coming to a ceasefire, but lots of difficulties, it's an even better time to be reminded of that period of history.
It's a really important time to remember what Britain, the Commonwealth and our allies achieved together, and focus on uniting in remembering what we can do when we combine our forces for and that's what happened 80 years ago to defend the freedoms that we all enjoy today, and we should hold them very dear while we say thank you to our veterans and those who sacrificed alongside them.
Now, talk to us about some of the things that you guys have planned in terms of the remembrance. What do you think will resonate most with people?
Well, I think every time that we start to share a veteran's story, Ruth, who's registered with the Royal British Legion, talks about the electric buzz in Whitehall 80 years ago and cheering as the King came onto the balcony. And I think when we start to share those stories from veterans like Ruth with people in public at our events, that's what really captures people's hearts and minds. And we'll be doing plenty of that this year in our community commemorations right across the country. In the schools programme, we're working with the government on so that there'll be educational resources featuring veteran stories for all ages of school children. And we'll be encouraging schools to come together on VE Day to mark that, culminating with a big event at the National Memorial Arboretum to mark the end of the Second World War, where again we'll touch people's heartstrings, provide moments of joy and celebration, but also moments of remembrance.
OK, Philippa, I presume the King will be involved in these as well, won't he?
Well, we're very fortunate. The King is the patron of the Royal British Legion, and we're in direct communication with the royal household to make sure that he's fully supportive of the plans that we and others have for to mark these important anniversaries. It's always very special. We had the King with us on D-Day last year, and seeing the King greet the veterans and talk to the veterans, really important, and shows how much the royal family value the service and sacrifice of our armed forces family.
Yeah, everyone would love to see him there on that day. Philippa Rawlinson from the British Legion, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, well, you're watching the UK Tonight, still to come. While the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is planning to cut billions from the welfare budget in her spring statement. Welcome back. Now, several £billion in spending cuts, including from the welfare budget, are expected to be announced in the Chancellor's spring statement later this month. It's understood there's a 4-point plan involving planning reform, Whitehall cuts, regulation cuts and cuts to the welfare budget. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, explains.
3 weeks today, the spring statement. Or is it the grim statement? The moment Rachel Reeves' own watchdog marks how she's doing against her borrowing target. And we find out how much she'll need to cut. Back in October, she set really tough borrowing targets so that from 2029, everyday government must be financed by taxes, not borrowing. Look, not achieved through this entire period. And then the plans only manage it by historically a tiny margin. And since January, as Ed Conway and me kept saying, things have got worse. The lines we were pointing to at in January showed borrowing going up and GDP growth disappointing, potentially wiping out that £9.9 billion of headroom, which would mean emergency cuts to get herself back on track. But here's a new thing. I've learned that she is going to have to take action if that £9.9 billion is squeezed at all. The Treasury doesn't think this margin for error can get any smaller. That means more cuts to public services and welfare. Look how tight planned Whitehall budgets already are. Public spending up from 2026 by a meagre 1.3%. And with some bits like health gobbling up more, that'll mean cuts in other areas. It's almost certain the Chancellor will need to squeeze future public spending further. Maybe as low as a 1% rise, the same planned by the last Tory government. What does that mean for this Labour's manifesto? Well, cabinet ministers tell me this means more promises junked. Some in government fear Rachel Reeves is being allowed to keep her pledge not to raise most taxes by making colleagues break theirs. This woman, well, she's having to change her plans. A month ago, the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, was not going to announce firm savings at the spring statement. Now, it seems she will, and a big row looms there. So number 10 and number 11 have a 4-point plan to get back on the front foot. New welfare proposals with expected changes to benefits. A big announcement on slimming down the civil service. Keir Starmer will make a show of tearing up some red tape regulations. And next week, Angela Rayner publishes her planning bill to get Britain building. This is the poppy strategy. Plant tall poppies to make sure that the tallest one, the bad news on borrowing, doesn't look too exposed. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves working in lockstep. But elsewhere in Whitehall, they're worried. Is the public ready for more pain and more U-turns?
Brilliant, Sam Coates there. Well, let's discuss this further by speaking to the former Chief of Staff to former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. Rupert Harrison is joining us. He also ran for Parliament for the Conservatives at the last general election. And we're going to speak to the Head of Social Policy at the New Economics Foundation, Tom Pollard. Rupert, Tom, thanks both for being with us. Let's just first start, guys, if we can, just by laying out our positions on this topic. And Rupert, I know that you think that the cuts to welfare spending are perhaps a good idea, and Tom, I think that you think it's a bad idea. Tom, why don't you start with tell us why you think it would be a bad move for the Chancellor to cut spending on welfare?
Well, I think just before Christmas, the government set out some really positive plans about how to try to improve employment support, particularly for people who are long-term unemployed because of disabilities and health conditions. And the risk is that yet another round of kind of cuts and changes to those benefits massively undermines that agenda. We've seen round and round this type of these types of cuts and changes over the last 20 years. And on the whole, they've often failed to achieve the savings that they've set out to achieve, but have caused a lot of anxiety and distress to people and made it a lot harder for people to engage with DWP in a kind of trusting way, which is critical if people are going to move towards work.
And Rupert, why do you think it is a good idea for the Chancellor to make these cuts at this stage?
Well, I think it's the bare minimum of what she's going to have to do. And you know, before considering that, it's quite extraordinary that less than 6 months after the budget, she's going to have to come back, having added 70 billion to spending and left only 10 billion of headroom. That's pretty extraordinary that less than 6 months later, she's got to scramble for some kind of emergency cuts to the welfare budget. So where I do agree is that kind of doing this at the last minute and penciling in numbers that you have to achieve because you've got to hit your fiscal rules, rather than having a well thought through plan to reform welfare, is not ideal at all. Where she's right is that welfare is a very important place to look for savings from government spending, because particularly the cost of the sickness benefits bill has ballooned in recent years since COVID. And that is not just because the population have got sicker. The system isn't working. There used to be cross-party support for this. So actually the predecessor to these problems, incapacity benefit, went wrong in the 90s and the early noughties. And the current system, the work capability assessment, was actually brought in under the Blair government and then implemented and reformed again under the Conservatives. So there used to be a cross-party consensus that people who could work going on to sickness benefits is not good for them, it's not good for the taxpayer, and reform is necessary.
But Rupert, I mean, Tom mentioned this 20-year of cuts. You were working for George Osborne when some of those cuts were made under austerity. Which measures do you think were cut too far that have led to where we are now?
Well, that's not the problem with what we've got now. The problem with the sickness benefits bill is it's a complicated problem, but basically there are some benefits where you have an expectation that you should work and you should look for work, And if you don't look for work, you get sanctioned. And there's a lot of evidence that that's very effective, that those requirements encourage people to look for work. But if you are signed off as sick enough, you don't have work requirements. And the problem is that many, many more people have been getting through to the latter one of those tests. The test is not working, it's being gamed. There's a lot of evidence that it's not good for people to have those work requirements removed, and they end up out of work for a very long time.
Sure, but there's also research from the LSE and others that found that those cuts under austerity led to a significant drop in life expectancy. People got sicker, there was more pressure on the health service because of the cuts made under that government that you were a part of.
That study's very contested. I don't accept that at all. I think that's absolute nonsense. That, restoring the public finances to health was vital to being able to, for example, do things like furlough in COVID. If we hadn't got debt and deficit down, we wouldn't have been able to do those things. But as I say, there should be a cross-party consensus on welfare reform, because it's not good for individuals to be signed off sick and be out of work for a long period, and it's not good for the taxpayer.
Tom, austerity had nothing to do with how sick a society we are now. Those cuts had no impact.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that. I mean, what we have seen is we've seen worsening mental health, we've seen growing poverty. There's kind of objective data from NHS showing that there has been a decline in health. I agree there are challenges around how the benefit system functions, but actually the evidence around placing kind of strict requirements on people who have health conditions is nowhere near as robust as the wider evidence of what's called conditionality, moving people into work. And what's been shown actually is that if you put pressure on people who are struggling with, for example, their mental health, they disengage from support, and at worst, people end up, basically destitute because of sanctions. There's very little evidence that for this group of people, a kind of heavy stick approach, as opposed to supporting people, is effective. And so what I worry about is we're going to push more and more people onto a very low rate of the basic rate of benefit. Actually, that will contribute to worsening health, and either people will be pushed into kind of poor quality work that's not good for their health, or they'll just remain in the system. And a lot of the reforms the previous government put in place basically just shifted people around from one part of the system to the other, but they didn't make a big impact on ill and disabled people returning to work.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you do accept that that perhaps the benefit bill has now become unaffordable. £48 billion at the moment. 4.2 million people are now, working age people are now claiming a benefit. That can't continue, and it's predicted to increase.
Well, there's lots of reasons why that bill has increased, lots of complex reasons. As a proportion of GDP, the benefit bill isn't significantly higher than it was pre-pandemic. So we need to look at this in context and look at also things like an ageing population, a rising state pension age. There are lots of things at play, but I do accept that there clearly is an issue around so many people feeling unable to work because of health problems and disabilities. What I don't accept is that cutting the financial support that people receive, which isn't a huge amount of money, let's be honest about that, and also then applying kind of pressure and stress to those people, that is the way to fix this problem. I think that the only way to do it is through long-term sustainable efforts to improve people's health, improve the quality of jobs available, and improve the quality of employment support. And every time that governments have tried to shortcut this process by making kind of very rapid short-term cuts to benefits, it hasn't actually achieved long-term impact.
I mean, Rupert, the 2012 Welfare Reform Act got rid of a number of benefits. I think that's shortly after that PIP came in, didn't it? But the point that's being made by Tom here is that PIP is now being used, and that is one of the benefits that's very, very expensive. So those reforms that came in that were meant to reduce the bill actually ended up costing more.
Yeah, I would agree that on balance over time, the PIP reforms have not worked. I think that is not working effectively for taxpayers. It is proving too expensive, and I totally agree with that. We have done this before successfully, though. So we had a huge problem with incapacity benefit in the 90s and into the early noughties. The reforms that brought in the work capability assessment on that side of things did work under both Labour and then Conservative and coalition governments to bring down that bill. And it wasn't just by cutting the amount of money that people get, it was by getting more people into work. Partly it was that millions of jobs were created over that period, but it was also about encouraging people into work, which is good for them, good for the taxpayer. We have these two problems. We have the PIP system, which I absolutely agree is not working, and we have the work capability assessment. The problem is these are very difficult judgments that have to be made. You have to involve doctors and specialists. And the problem is any system, once it's been in place for a certain amount of time, starts to be eroded. It gets eroded by court judgments, it gets eroded by changes in behaviour, and it also, sadly, starts to be gamed. And so the problem is you have to always stay on top of this. You have to keep reforming the system, making sure that it's not springing new leaks, that it's trying to help the people it was designed to help, and that it's not costing more than it was intended to.
Quick thought from you both on the final thing on this spring statement. Do you think it's just likely we're going to have a tax increase? Rupert first.
I think we're not going to have a tax increase because I think that would be politically absolutely catastrophic for Rachel Reeves. I'm sure a lot of her cabinet colleagues would much prefer a tax increase than to having their budgets that they thought they had agreed being cut again, and to having to stomach some of these welfare reforms that they might find difficult. I suspect that when she comes back in the autumn, unless she gets lucky, I think they are going to need to raise taxes, and that is, I think, going to be politically absolutely disastrous, because that's exactly what she has promised not to do.
Tom, thought from you quickly, if you can.
Yeah, I agree that probably is the likely scenario. I think it's unfortunate because I do think that what's happening now is that we are having to find kind of short-term emergency savings, and the savings that are kind of sketched in for the welfare budget will fall on some of the poorest households in the country, and that actually rebalancing the tax system towards those who can afford to contribute more would be a much better way of addressing the issue.
All right, Tom, Pollard and Rupert Harrison, good conversation, guys. Thanks for that. Thanks for joining us, and have a good evening.
Thanks.
And we kept saying PIP there, didn't we? That's the personal independence payment, if you weren't sure. It was a good talk, that, anyway. All right, coming up on the UK tonight, Wild Beavers are going to make a historic return to England, and we've got the details. And in the sport, could a Super Bowl-style halftime show be on its way to the World Cup final?
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong, and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it, let me see it. This is brilliant, brilliant.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent, and from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello and welcome back there. We're going to take a look soon at plans to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day across the country. But first, Teddy is here with all the sports. Teddy, it's great to have you with us. I got a notification on my phone today.
Yes.
Suggesting there is going to be a halftime show at the USA World Cup final.
It's been, it's been a staple of the NFL and the Super Bowl, hasn't it? The flagship event of American sports since 1967. It used to be marching bands, and it became Janet Jackson, Paul McCartney, Katy Perry, etc., etc. But Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, ahead of the World Cup being in the United States, Mexico and Canada next year, with the final at the MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, has said there is plans for a halftime show in the World Cup final in 2026. So there'll be a bigger festival over the weekend in Times Square. And then at half-time, Kendrick Lamar, of course, at the Super Bowl in New Orleans, and had some epic Super Bowl performers, including Coldplay, who interestingly have been commissioned by Gianni Infantino, along with Global Citizen, which is an anti-poverty organisation, to orchestrate this halftime show. So the mind boggles. It's not said that Coldplay are going to be there. I wouldn't mind that. Some of their early stuff was good, but it's,
Yellow was pretty good.
Yeah, that was a great song, wasn't it? Yeah, so that would be interesting.
Stadium rock after that.
Yeah,
so maybe that's what they want. I mean, they're serious. This is a real thing. I thought the notification was a joke.
No, Gianni Infantino, and whether it's playing into the whole Americana of being there, as we say, Canada and Mexico are sort of joint hosts with them, but very American-focused in terms of this showpiece event.
Any response from, like, clubs, players, anyone said anything?
I haven't heard anyone announce that yet, but it is interesting. Oasis are reforming this year. I suppose it's, you know, do they have to have a Spanish language maybe for the Mexican component of it as well? So it'd be interesting to see who are the main stars there, but it looks to be happening. But there will be complications. You mentioned to me as well, typically in the NFL, stop-start sport takes 3 or 4 hours for a game. They have a half-an-hour half-time show. But it's going to be 15 minutes, the standard our football affair. It's going to be very rushed, isn't it, to get them on and off and all the stages.
And a quick thought as well, we've got the Women's World Cup bid potentially announced.
Yes, so Keir Starmer has tweeted, obviously, about the football, and he has said that the England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland bid is very much backed by the government for the Women's World Cup in 2035. FIFA Council saying that that will be 2031 and 2035 events will be decided by vote by all members at Congress next year. Starmer says, I've ever told you how much I love football. Let's bring the FIFA World Cup to the UK. And we were talking as well that he has said in a longer statement how he plays every weekend. But Sir Keir Starmer behind that. We'll see next year whether these islands get the Women's World Cup, like the Euros, the champions. So, yeah, big news around global football. Meanwhile, Liverpool in action in the Champions League tonight. We'll update you on that.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
When he came back to Tottenham as an Arsenal player, the crowd were unbelievably abusive towards him.
It was very intense. You could cut the atmosphere. You could just feel it was different.
Sol Campbell comes out to face the music, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this North London derby revolved around just one man.
Back then, there was no support. People were just allowed to just carry on in a disgraceful way.
Sol is a sensitive human being, so obviously he felt it, but he didn't show it.
Obviously he's a great player, and obviously all the managers.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Thank you for that, Teddy. Now, history was made in Dorset earlier, where 2 beaver pairs were released legally into the wild for the first time in England, more than 400 years after their extinction. The semi-aquatic rodents making a new home at the National Trust Purbeck Heath Nature Reserve. It comes after the government gave the go-ahead for wild populations to return to England's rivers and wetlands. Conservationists have called it a watershed moment. Very good. All right, well, let's speak to Sandra King, Chief Exec of the Beaver Trust. Sandra, thanks so much for joining us. Good evening to you. A happy day.
Yeah, really, really happy day for us. I mean, to put it in context, for us at Beaver Trust, in the last 4 years, we've actually undertaken nearly 70 beaver releases across Britain. And in Scotland, we can already release legally into the wild. But in England, we've only been able to release into what are called fenced enclosures. So today, with our partners at the National Trust, you know, the first legal beavers released into the wild in England. People have been working for this, that I know, for years and years and years. So it's massive. It's a massive deal. Very exciting.
Absolutely. Talk to us about what beavers will bring back to nature that we lost 400 years ago.
Well, what you have to understand is British nature evolved with beavers, wetlands. So when we took the beavers out of the system, the habitat that they create was lost to native species, and that's from birds to fish to butterflies. So when you put them back in, you get this massive boost to nature and biodiversity because they create these beautiful wetlands that are just fantastic places for our other native species to thrive. So there's biodiversity, but then there's the water. So what they do with these wetlands is they slow the flow so they can really help with flooding. So loads of scientific studies have shown that they can slow that. When there's heavy rainfall, the water going in is, the water flowing out of a beaver wetland is 30% slower than what going in. And it can often make the difference of stopping flooding a village downstream. And then, you know, in the last couple of summers, we've seen a lot of drought situations, even in Britain, but the beaver wetlands store the water. And there's some fantastic aerial images from a site down in Devon that shows in the dry summer, really brown fields where there's no beavers, and then lush, wet fields where there is beaver wetlands because of the water they store. So, yeah, it's pretty special species.
And Sandra, there's been some pushback, hasn't there, from some groups. Of course, 400 years that they've been extinct, the country's changed a lot, the infrastructure of the country's changed a lot. Any concern that, you know, if they're felling trees and creating dams, they could cause issues in places?
I think the most important thing to remember on this is that we're about 30 years behind other European countries. So they've worked out how to do it all. Natural England have already set out a 5-step management plan for how we'll manage beavers and wetlands. And actually, when people want to put a licence application in to get a licence to release the beavers, they're going to have to say, how have we spoken to local landowners and stakeholders, and how will we manage if there are any things that come into play? So I would say let's have confidence that we know what we're doing. You know, there's tried and tested methods that we can use. So, yeah, I think let's just get on with coexisting with this species. They have so many benefits to bring. But it's new, you know, as humans in Britain, that's 400 years, we've forgotten how to live with beavers. So we need to relearn again. But I think we can learn a lot from other countries. My team have been working on this for years. So we're pretty confident that there's plenty tried and tested methods we can use to welcome them back.
Your confidence is contagious, Sandra. So we'll look forward to seeing the beavers if we get the chance. Thanks so much for being with us, Sandra.
You're very welcome.
All right, let's take a look at the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And settled end to the week, but much milder, with 18 degrees possible in some parts tomorrow. Before then, many places will be fine this evening, although it'll be windy in the northwest. Expect coastal gales with patchy drizzly rain over northwestern parts. Northwestern Scotland will see rain becoming heavier tonight, while southwestern Scotland, Northern Ireland and the north of Ireland will slowly dry up.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, that's all from the UK tonight. You can catch all the highlights on our website or just scan the QR code on screen. Gillian is up next.